In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where manicured lawns and neatly trimmed hedges were the norm, Jason Miller lived a simple, predictable life. He wasn't flashy or loud, just an average guy who preferred staying under the radar, a tech-savvy IT specialist by trade. Jason worked remotely for a company that sounded boring to most people, but was actually anything but ordinary. His company was a government contractor tied to the U.S. Department of Defense, and his job involved monitoring sensitive data through encrypted live feeds. These weren't your run-of-the-mill video calls. They were high-stakes streams connecting him directly to secure servers used by analysts at the Pentagon. But none of his neighbors knew that. To them, he was just another dad typing away on his laptop while occasionally glancing out the window. Jason's house didn't scream secret agent. It looked like any other home on Maple Street. 2 stories, beige siding, and a mailbox slightly tilted from years of wear. The only thing that stood out was the single fiber optic cable snaking discreetly along the side of his house. Most people probably thought it was for internet or TV service, not something critical to national security. And honestly, Jason liked it that way. He didn't want attention. All he cared about was doing his job well and keeping his head down. But not everyone in the neighborhood shared Jason's low-key approach to life. Enter Karen Hargrove, the self-appointed guardian of all things proper within the Homeowners Association, HOA. Karen wasn't officially elected as the HOA president, but she might as well have been. She had a knack for spotting minor infractions, like chipped paint on mailboxes or cars parked half an inch over the curb, and making them her personal mission to fix. Her laser focus on rules bordered on obsessive, and her clipboard was practically glued to her hand during morning walks around the block. Karen had taken notice of Jason's property months ago, though she hadn't acted on it yet. His yard wasn't exactly pristine. The grass was a little longer than regulation length, and one of his hedges had grown unruly, spilling over onto the sidewalk. At first, she left polite notes tucked into his doorframe, reminders about lawn maintenance deadlines and suggestions for pruning techniques, but Jason either ignored the notes or forgot to act on them. After all, he was busy juggling work calls, troubleshooting cybersecurity issues, and helping his kids with homework. Mowing the lawn wasn't exactly top priority. As weeks turned into months, Karen grew increasingly irritated. How dare someone flout the rules so blatantly? Didn't Jason understand that the neighborhood's beauty depended on everyone following the guidelines? Every time she passed his house, her blood pressure seemed to rise a little higher. One day, as she strolled past his driveway, she paused, squinting at his front window. Through the glass, she could see what appeared to be a tangled mess of wires running along the baseboard. Was that unsightly? Unapproved? Whatever it was, it certainly didn't meet HOA standards. Fuming, Karen decided it was time to take action. She'd already given Jason plenty of chances to clean up his act. Now, it was up to her to restore order to the neighborhood, one snip at a time. Little did she know, her next move would set off a chain reaction far beyond her wildest imagination. Karen Hargrove wasn't the type of person to let things slide, especially when it came to enforcing HOA rules. Her dedication, or some might say obsession, with maintaining the neighborhood's pristine appearance was unmatched. To Karen, every overgrown hedge, chipped mailbox, or stray garden gnome was a personal affront to her vision of suburban perfection. And Jason Miller's house had become her latest project. After weeks of sending polite reminders that went unanswered, Karen decided it was time to escalate her efforts. She began parking her car just outside Jason's driveway during her daily morning walks, pretending to admire his flower beds while secretly scrutinizing every inch of his property. She noted the uneven edges of his lawn, the patchy spots where grass refused to grow, and most egregious of all, the tangle of wires visible through his front window. In her mind, these infractions weren't minor annoyances. They were glaring violations that needed immediate attention. One sunny Tuesday morning, Karen made her move. Armed with a clipboard and freshly sharpened gardening shears, She marched up to Jason's side yard. She told herself she was doing this for the good of the community. After all, if one homeowner got away with breaking the rules, what would stop others from following suit? Chaos would ensue. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. No, she couldn't let that happen, not on her watch. As she approached the mysterious bundle of cables snaking out of the ground near Jason's foundation, Karen felt a surge of determination. From her perspective, the cable looked like any other utility line, a messy eyesore that clashed with the otherwise tidy aesthetic of the neighborhood. Surely, no one would miss it if she trimmed it back a little, right? Besides, she reasoned, if Jason cared so little about keeping his property in line with HOA standards, then maybe he deserved a little push in the right direction. Meanwhile, inside his house, Jason was completely unaware of Karen's growing vendetta. He sat hunched over his computer, typing furiously as encrypted data streamed across multiple monitors. His phone buzzed on the desk beside him, but he ignored it, assuming it was yet another notification from work. What he didn't know was that the message waiting in his inbox carried urgent instructions. Under no circumstances was he to tamper with or disconnect the live feed running through his home. The email emphasized the importance of uninterrupted service due to ongoing national security operations. But Jason, distracted by the demands of his job, skimmed the message without fully absorbing its gravity. Outside, Karen crouched beside the cable, inspecting it closely. It wasn't labeled with any warning signs, nor did it look particularly special. Just a plain black cord, partially buried in dirt. If anything, it seemed like an oversight, an unauthorized addition to the property that violated both HOA guidelines and common sense. With a satisfied nod, Karen opened her gardening shears and prepared to do what she believed was necessary. Little did she know, the seemingly innocuous wire she was about to cut wasn't just any ordinary cable. It was the lifeline connecting Jason's workstation to a secure server deep underground, a server currently transmitting classified information to analysts at the Pentagon. Every second counted in ensuring the safety and security of the nation. Yet, as Karen raised her shears, ready to snip, she remained blissfully unaware of the storm she was about to unleash. The quiet suburban neighborhood, once a picture of calm and order, was about to be turned upside down. All because one woman decided to take matters into her own hands, and one man failed to realize how close danger truly was. The crisp Saturday morning air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass as Karen Hargrove stood confidently in Jason Miller's side yard, her gardening shears glinting in the sunlight. Birds chirped cheerfully overhead, and the distant hum of a lawnmower provided a peaceful backdrop to what was about to become anything but peaceful. Karen adjusted her grip on the shears, her lips pursed with determination. To her, this moment wasn't just about enforcing HOA rules. It was about proving a point. If Jason wouldn't clean up his act, then she'd do it for him. With one swift motion, Karen snipped through the unassuming black cable that snaked out of the ground near Jason's foundation. The shears made a satisfying snick as the cord parted cleanly, leaving two severed ends dangling limply in the dirt. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The birds kept chirping, the breeze rustled the leaves, and the neighborhood remained blissfully unaware of the chaos brewing beneath its surface. Karen straightened up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and allowed herself a small, self-satisfied smile. Mission accomplished, or so she thought. Inside the house, Jason was mid-conversation with a colleague over a secure video call when alarms began blaring. Red warning lights flashed across his computer monitors like strobes, and error messages flooded the screens faster than he could read them. His heart sank as he realized something had gone terribly wrong. "Hold on," he muttered into his headset, scrambling to assess the situation. His fingers flew across the keyboard, but the damage was undeniable. The live feed connecting him to the Pentagon secure servers had been severed. Panic gripped Jason as he bolted out of his chair and rushed toward the front door. Throwing it open, he froze at the sight of Karen standing near the side of his house, still clutching her gardening shears. Her smug expression faltered when she saw the look of sheer terror on his face. "What did you do?" Jason demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he sprinted past her, dropping to his knees beside the severed cable. His mind raced as he inspected the damage. This wasn't just any wire. It was a critical link in a chain of communication vital to national security. And now, thanks to Karen's overzealousness, it was broken. Before Jason could fully process the implications, the sound of tires screeching to a halt shattered the suburban tranquility. Black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up along the curb, blocking off the street. Doors swung open, and men in dark suits spilled out, their movements brisk and purposeful. Some wore military uniforms adorned with insignias, while others carried equipment that looked more suited to a spy movie than a quiet neighborhood. Neighbors peered out of their windows, curiosity piqued by the sudden commotion. Karen watched in stunned silence as several agents approached her, their expressions grim. One of them held up a badge before asking, "Ma'am, can you explain what happened here?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. She glanced down at the gardening shears in her hand, then back at the swarm of officials surrounding her property. It dawned on her, slowly and painfully, that this wasn't just another HOA dispute. Something far bigger and far scarier was unfolding right before her eyes. Jason, meanwhile, tried to explain the situation to the lead agent, who listened intently while barking orders into a radio. Technicians hurried inside his house to evaluate the extent of the breach, their faces tense with concern. As the gravity of the situation became clearer, Jason couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and disbelief. How could someone so obsessed with order cause such monumental disorder? For Karen, reality hit hard. The pride she'd felt moments earlier evaporated, replaced by a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. She suddenly wished she'd never picked up those gardening shears, or better yet, never set foot on Jason's property. But there was no undoing what had been done. The neighborhood, once a haven of calm predictability, was now the epicenter of a crisis that reached far beyond its tree-lined streets. The scene outside Jason Miller's house quickly transformed from a quiet suburban morning into something resembling a high-stakes action movie. Black SUVs lined the street, their engines idling as agents in suits and military uniforms swarmed the area. Yellow caution tape was strung up around Jason's property within minutes, creating a perimeter that blocked curious neighbors from getting too close. The once peaceful neighborhood buzzed with tension as people peeked through curtains and whispered to each other about what could possibly be happening. Karen Hargrove, still clutching her gardening shears, stood frozen near the severed cable, her face pale and her hands trembling. Agents surrounded her, firing questions faster than she could process them. "Ma'am, can you explain why you cut this line?" one of them asked sternly, holding up the damaged cable for emphasis. Another agent scribbled notes on a clipboard while a third snapped photos of the scene. Karen stammered, struggling to form coherent sentences. "I thought it was. I didn't know." She managed to choke out, but her words trailed off into silence. Inside the house, technicians worked feverishly to assess the damage. They pored over Jason's equipment, running diagnostics and tracing the flow of data, or lack thereof. What they discovered sent chills down everyone's spines. The severed fiber optic cable wasn't just a random utility line. It was part of an intricate network transmitting live, classified intelligence to analysts at the Pentagon. This wasn't some minor technical glitch. It was a full-blown security breach. Worse yet, the disruption had triggered automatic fail-safes designed to alert foreign entities monitoring for vulnerabilities. In short, the entire system had been compromised, and the consequences could ripple far beyond Maple Street. Jason watched helplessly as the gravity of the situation unfolded before his eyes. He tried to stay calm, answering questions from investigators as best he could. "I had no idea anyone would tamper with it," he explained, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's not like there were warning signs or anything. While he knew he bore some responsibility for not making the cable's importance clearer, he couldn't believe how easily someone could walk onto his property and cut such a critical piece of infrastructure. Outside, Karen's interrogation intensified. An agent led her to a nearby government vehicle, where she sat stiffly in the back seat, gripping her shears so tightly her knuckles turned white. Inside the car, the questioning grew more pointed. "Did you have permission to enter Mr. Miller's property?" one agent asked. Karen shook her head, avoiding eye contact. "Were you aware this cable was connected to a secure government server?" Another pressed. She hesitated, then muttered, "No, I swear I didn't know." Her voice cracked under the weight of her guilt. As word spread about the incident, neighbors gathered cautiously along the edge of the taped-off zone, exchanging theories and gossip. Some speculated that Jason was involved in something shady, while others defended him, pointing out his otherwise unremarkable lifestyle. Most, however, focused their attention on Karen. "Isn't that the HOA lady?" one neighbor whispered. "The one who always complains about everything." Another nodded knowingly. "Looks like she finally went too far." For Karen, the realization of what she'd done began to sink in. She replayed the events in her mind. The way she'd marched onto Jason's property without hesitation, the smug satisfaction she'd felt after snipping the cable, and now, the horrified expressions of the agents surrounding her. It dawned on her that her actions might have jeopardized national security, a thought so overwhelming she could barely breathe. Tears welled up in her eyes as she buried her face in her hands, muttering apologies to anyone who would listen. But apologies wouldn't undo the mess she'd created. Back inside the house, the mood was grim. Technicians warned Jason and the lead investigator that reconnecting the feed wouldn't be simple. The breach had already triggered alarms, meaning foreign intelligence agencies might now be aware of the vulnerability. Every second counted in containing the fallout. Meanwhile, outside, the sight of armed guards patrolling Jason's yard served as a stark reminder of just how serious the situation had become. What had started as a petty neighborhood dispute over aesthetics had spiraled into a crisis with implications reaching far beyond Maple Street. And as the day wore on, it became painfully clear that neither Jason nor Karen would ever look at their quiet suburban lives the same way again. The interrogation of Karen Hargrove stretched on for hours, though it felt like days to her. Sitting in the back seat of the government vehicle, she clutched her gardening shears as if they were a lifeline, her knuckles white from the strain. The agent's questions came in rapid-fire succession, each one more pointed than the last. "Why did you cut the cable? Did you know it was connected to a secure system? Do you realize the potential consequences of your actions?" Karen stammered through her responses, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and shame. At first, she tried to downplay her role, insisting she was simply tidying up the neighborhood. "It looked like an eyesore," she explained, her tone defensive but shaky. "I didn't think it was important. I mean, it wasn't marked or anything." But the agents weren't buying her excuses. One of them held up a photo taken from Jason's security cameras. Clear footage of Karen marching onto his property, inspecting the cable, and cutting it without hesitation. There was no denying what she'd done. As the weight of the situation sank in, Karen began to break down. Tears streamed down her face as she muttered apologies over and over again. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I had no idea it was. I didn't mean to." Her words trailed off into sobs, but the damage was already done. The agents exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. They made it clear that her intentions didn't matter. The breach had occurred, and the fallout could be catastrophic. Meanwhile, Jason found himself caught in a whirlwind of activity. Technicians worked tirelessly to repair the severed connection, while investigators grilled him about the lack of visible warnings on the cable. "Why didn't you mark it more clearly?" one agent asked, his tone sharp but not accusatory. Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I thought it was obvious," he admitted. "It's not like people usually mess with utility lines unless they're professionals." He paused, then added, "Besides, I never expected someone would trespass and cut it. The lead investigator nodded, jotting notes on his clipboard. While Jason wasn't entirely blameless, he acknowledged that clearer markings might have prevented the incident. The agents recognized that Karen's actions were the primary cause of the breach. Still, Jason couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility gnawing at him. If only he'd been more vigilant, none of this would have happened. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with speculation. Neighbors who had once rolled their eyes at Karen's micromanaging now stared at her with a mix of disbelief and pity. Some whispered behind cupped hands, calling her reckless or clueless. Others simply shook their heads, marveling at how quickly the day had spiraled out of control. A few even approached Jason, offering words of support. "Don't worry, Jason," one neighbor said kindly. "We all know you're not the problem here." By late afternoon, the immediate crisis began to stabilize. The technicians managed to reconnect the live feed, though not without significant effort. The Pentagon's analysts confirmed that the breach hadn't led to any direct compromises yet. However, the incident served as a wake-up call for everyone involved. Additional safeguards were implemented immediately, including reinforced cabling and prominent warning signs to prevent future mishaps. For Karen, the ordeal was far from over. After hours of questioning, she was finally released, but not before being sternly warned about the seriousness of her actions. She shuffled back to her house under the watchful eyes of her neighbors, her usual air of confidence replaced by a defeated slump in her shoulders. As she closed her front door behind her, she collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For the first time in years, Karen realized she had gone too far, and there was no undoing the chaos she had unleashed. That night, as the neighborhood returned to an uneasy calm, Jason sat on his porch, staring at the newly repaired cable snaking along the side of his house. He couldn't help but reflect on how close everything had come to disaster. What started as a minor HOA dispute had escalated into something far bigger, a stark reminder that even the smallest actions could have enormous consequences. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Maple Street, it became clear that life in the quiet suburban neighborhood would never quite be the same again. The days following the incident brought a wave of change to the quiet suburban neighborhood, but none felt it more acutely than Karen Hargrove. Once the self-appointed enforcer of HOA rules and the woman who prided herself on maintaining order, she now found herself at the center of ridicule and disdain. News of her actions spread like wildfire, not just locally, but nationally. Social media exploded with memes mocking her overzealous behavior, and late-night talk show hosts couldn't resist turning her into the punchline of their jokes. "When life gives you lemons, don't cut fiber optic cables," quipped one comedian, sending audiences into fits of laughter. Karen tried to lay low, avoiding her morning walks and keeping her curtains drawn, but whispers followed her everywhere she went. Neighbors who once tolerated, or even admired her strict adherence to the rules, now crossed the street to avoid making eye contact. The weight of public humiliation crushed her spirit, and for the first time in years, Karen began to question whether her obsession with control had been worth it. After weeks of enduring sideways glances and muttered comments, she finally resigned from the HOA board, leaving behind a leadership vacuum that many residents were happy to see filled. Jason Miller, on the other hand, emerged from the ordeal with newfound respect from his neighbors. While he faced some disciplinary action from his employer for failing to properly secure the cable, his role in the incident was largely seen as incidental. Investigators acknowledged that the lack of clear markings contributed to the misunderstanding, prompting the Pentagon to implement stricter protocols moving forward. Reinforced cabling replaced the old line, complete with bold warning signs that left no room for ambiguity. "Do not tamper critical national security infrastructure." The neighborhood itself underwent a subtle transformation. With Karen out of the picture, the HOA board elected new members who prioritized practicality over perfection. Lawn maintenance deadlines became suggestions rather than mandates, and homeowners breathed a collective sigh of relief. Brightly painted mailboxes and quirky garden decorations started popping up, adding personality to streets that had once looked eerily uniform. Jason noticed this shift almost immediately. For the first time since moving in, he felt like part of a community rather than just another name on an HOA roster. Determined to mend fences, literally and figuratively, Jason decided to host a backyard barbecue for his neighbors. He invited everyone on the block, setting up folding chairs and string lights in his yard. Burgers sizzled on the grill, kids chased each other around with water guns, and adults swapped stories over cold drinks. It was a far cry from the tense atmosphere of recent weeks, and Jason couldn't help but smile as he watched his neighbors laugh and bond. Even those who had previously dismissed him as unapproachable seemed eager to connect. As the evening wore on, conversation inevitably turned to Karen. Can you believe she thought cutting that cable was a good idea? One neighbor joked, shaking his head in disbelief. Laughter rippled through the group, though it carried a tinge of sadness. Despite everything, most people didn't wish ill on Karen. They simply wanted to move past the drama she had caused. Jason chimed in, offering a thoughtful perspective. I think we all learned something from this, he said. Sometimes, trying too hard to control things can backfire in ways we never expect. His words resonated with the crowd, sparking nods of agreement. As the night drew to a close, Jason stood by the grill, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. Life on Maple Street wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was better than before. The neighborhood had come together not because of shared triumph, but because of shared adversity. And while Karen's absence left a void, it also opened the door for a fresh start. A chance to rebuild not just the HOA, but the sense of community that had been missing all along. In the distance, Karen sat alone in her living room, scrolling through online headlines about herself. Each joke and meme stung, but deep down, she understood that she had brought this upon herself. Perhaps someday, she thought, she'd find a way to make amends. Until then, she resolved to keep her gardening shears safely tucked away, and her opinions to herself. Months passed, and life on Maple Street settled into a rhythm that felt lighter, freer, and more genuine than ever before. The chaos sparked by Karen Hargrove's ill-fated snip of Jason Miller's cable had faded, but its ripple effects lingered in subtle yet meaningful ways. The neighborhood wasn't just physically different, with colorful flower beds replacing cookie-cutter lawns and quirky decorations adorning porches. It was emotionally transformed, too. People smiled more, talked openly, and seemed genuinely invested in one another's lives. Jason became something of an unofficial ambassador for balance within the community. He often reminded his neighbors, usually with a chuckle, that perfection wasn't the goal. We're human, he'd say during casual chats over backyard fences or at the occasional block party. And sometimes, being good enough is exactly what we need. His words resonated deeply, especially after the rigidity Karen had imposed through her HOA reign. Neighbors appreciated his down-to-earth attitude and began looking to him as a voice of reason, a stark contrast to Karen's micromanaging ways. As for Karen, she quietly packed up her belongings and moved to a smaller town far away, where no one knew her name or her reputation. She sold her house quickly, eager to escape the whispers and judgmental stares that followed her everywhere. In her new home, she vowed to keep a low profile, trading her clipboard for a paintbrush and her gardening shears for a pair of binoculars to watch birds instead of neighbors. Though humbled, Karen struggled to shake off the weight of guilt. Late at night, when sleep eluded her, she'd scroll through interviews featuring Jason discussing lessons learned from the incident. In those moments, Karen reflected on how easily good intentions could spiral into disaster. She realized now that her obsession with rules hadn't been about creating harmony. It had been about control, plain and simple. And while she couldn't undo what she'd done, she hoped time would soften the memories of those who remembered her not as Karen the neighbor, but as the HOA hacker. Slowly, painfully, she began piecing together a quieter, simpler version of herself, one less focused on enforcing order and more open to embracing imperfection. Back on Maple Street, the HOA board flourished under its new leadership. Gone were the nitpicky regulations dictating mailbox colors or hedge heights. In their place came practical guidelines aimed at fostering connection rather than compliance. Community events replaced formal meetings, and laughter echoed through the streets more often than arguments. Even Jason's yard, once deemed unkempt by Karen's standards, earned compliments for its wild charm. "It's got character," one neighbor joked, patting him on the back. Jason grinned, knowing full well that his untrimmed hedges symbolize something bigger: freedom. Yet, despite the progress, the story of the severed cable remained a cautionary tale whispered among residents. Parents used it to teach their kids about thinking twice before taking action, while older neighbors cited it as proof that even small choices can have outsized consequences. It served as a reminder that lines, literal or metaphorical, shouldn't be crossed without understanding their purpose. One crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, Jason stood on his porch sipping coffee and watching the sunset. Across the street, children played tag, their giggles filling the air. A neighbor waved as they carried groceries inside, and someone else called out an invitation to a weekend barbecue. Life here was imperfect, messy, and wonderfully alive, and Jason wouldn't have had it any other way. The incident may have started with a single snip, but it ended with a neighborhood united, not by fear or rules, but by resilience and humanity. As Jason turned to head back inside, he paused for a moment, glancing at the reinforced cable running along the side of his house. It was still there, stronger than ever, carrying data vital to national security. But this time, bold signs warned anyone tempted to tamper with it. "Do not cut critical infrastructure." Jason chuckled softly to himself. Sometimes, the smallest reminders made all the difference.